Thank you. Thank you very much for the introduction. Thank you for having me. Thank you all for being here, coming back here this evening. This is going to be a very different talk than the one I'm giving tomorrow. Tomorrow will be more the teaching lecture style, and tonight is going to be the reflections on what it is that we're doing as a field. And my lecture tonight is designed to be an invitation. An invitation to think with me about information, about the role that information has in our lives as individuals, in our lives together as community and society. To think about access. Oh, wait, that's the wrong access. To think about access to this information. The process of people accessing it, the technologies that we use, that we build, that we're learning at the summer school this week to build, to facilitate access to that information, to think about why we are doing this in the first place. Why do people need information? Why do we try to facilitate it? What is our goal as we're building a system, as we're engaging with a system, as we're thinking about the systems that should be built, the information artifacts that should be built, the repositories that should be built, etc. To think about what it means for information to be good, for information access, and for an information access system to be good. To think about how these systems can promote community, belonging, inclusion, equity, etc., both in the system and its use and its operation itself, and also how information systems and information access systems may contribute to or hinder those values in society at large. I've been very pleased to see the pride flags proudly flying here in Vienna, and it's signaling that inclusion, even as in my own country, many leaders are working to render queer people invisible in our public life. How do we promote inclusion? How do we promote the inclusion and the visibility of a diverse set of the whole spectrum of humanity through our work on recommender systems and other information access systems? So I've used this term information access a few times. For those of you who might not be familiar with it, it's kind of an umbrella term to capture a range of different systems that are facilitating people's access to information. Recommendations, search engines, similar kinds of systems that let people find things, and we use them every day. We use them to find products that we want to purchase. We use them to find news stories that we want to read or that we don't want to read, but they're going to help us understand what's going on, so we read them anyway. Music, etc. And I think it would be very rare for most of us to go a day without interacting with at least one, if not a dozen, information access systems of various kinds. And to kind of slightly formalize them as an object of study as they're thinking about these systems, they're a system often AI-driven, but AI is not inherent to the process, and whether any individual system gets classified as AI has a lot more to do with the politics of research funding and venture funding than about the actual technology. But systems for which a user comes, they have some kind of a request. That request may be very specific. I want to know how to get from Vienna to Prague on Saturday. That request may be very vague. I'm bored, so I open Netflix. But some kind of a request that gets mixed up a little bit with mixed initiative things where the thing might actually proactively suggest, but we can abstract over that for a moment. The system then takes that request, consults some repository of knowledge or information or something, and comes back with a response. Historically, these responses have often been ranked lists of products, of web pages, of books, of songs, etc. Generative AI is changing that interaction modality a lot in many settings, but the basic loop persists. The user comes with some request, and the system tries to satisfy it in some way. So these are the categories of systems that we're talking about. And so if we have one of these systems and it says, suggest some books for me, or I open Netflix and it says, you should watch K-pop Demon Hunters, is that a good recommendation? Or if I type in a search query, the result's good? We can maybe ask other questions. Are they diverse? What do we mean by that? Are they fair? What does that mean? A lot of my career of the last 5 to 10 years has been trying to figure out what it means to ask, is this a fair list? I have more questions about that than when I started, but I have a better idea of what the questions are. So the broad question unifying a lot of my research agenda, and that I'm reflecting on with you tonight, is the question that kind of drives a lot of information access research, whether it happens at Rexis, whether it happens at SIGIR, UMAP, whether it's happening in corporate research and development on building new products. How do we effectively connect people to information? And then with my researcher and my trying to make the world a better place hat on, I ask, does it work? How well does it work? When? How? Why? When does this system fail? For who does it work or does it fail? Who maybe is getting harmed by the system through, maybe unintentionally, maybe through neglect. In some cases, it may be deliberate. And kind of the nagging question of, is what we're doing as intersecting communities working on information access making the world better? Are we delivering on some of the promise? Are we causing harm? How do we know? How do we even know whether we're improving things or causing harm? And so in that context, the set of things that I want to invite you to think about with me tonight, I want to start with why we even do information access. Because as I've worked on a lot of these questions and a lot of these problems, what does it mean to be fair? In what contexts do we care about which types of fairness? When should we not try to be fair? Are there times when we should try to be unfair? Well, what does it mean for the recommender system, the search engine, the chatbot to be good? In what sense? In what context? Thinking clearly about what we're trying to accomplish with the system, both as designers, researchers, platform owners, what our vision and purpose for this system is, as individual users, like what the purpose the user comes to the system for, that might be different for different users. If you build a system, users will use it for all kinds of things you did not anticipate. There's a story I heard a number of years ago in the social computing research community of this fascinating ad hoc social network that had emerged among some residents in somewhere in rural UK in the comments section of a newspaper's daily crossword. So the newspaper posted this daily crossword, and then everybody would show up in a bunch of people would show up in the comment section. They would have these discussions about life in their community and all these things. Like, hey, we're not going to post on Facebook. We're not going to post on Twitter. We're going to post in the comment section of the newspaper's daily crossword. So they're going to use it for all kinds of different purposes. But what are users coming to your system for? Because purpose informs evaluation. And evaluation informs and guides design. So everything flows downstream from why we're building and operating the system in the first place. So kind of the classic purpose that we think about, that maybe we all learned to think about in our first information retrieval class, that's kind of the baseline purpose assumed in a lot of research papers, is that we're trying to satisfy some information need that the user has. They come to the system, they have a need for some piece of information. This is very much kind of the information retrieval view, the default one. As I said earlier, these needs can take many forms. Here we are now, entertain us, is an information need in my view. It's underspecified, it's very vague, it's for entertainment-oriented information, but it's an information need. And the purpose of the system is to satisfy these needs. And so then with that purpose in mind, we ask questions like, how well is it satisfying our users' information needs? And we'll look for a bunch of metrics that we can compute with offline data sets, that we can compute by asking users whether their needs were met, that we could compute by looking at user behavior. Does the way that they click on our results indicate that their needs are being met, etc.? We can ask questions like, are all of our users having their needs met? Or is there a group of users who comes to our site and just isn't able to find anything useful, etc.? But this is one view of what the purpose of the system is. And if you adopt this view, then you have a number of consequences in terms of evaluation, design, etc. We can think about trying to promote economic opportunity and equity of economic opportunity. So when I first started in recommender systems back in 2009, Chris Anderson had just published his book, The Long Tail, and a lot of people were talking about it in the Rexis community. It was mentioned in several keynotes, etc. And this isn't a full endorsement. The book has some weird parts, but part of the fundamental logic of the book was with internet scale discovery, internet scale shopping abilities, global distribution capabilities, or nationwide at the very least, there's an opportunity for a far larger set of products, creators, vendors, etc., to be visible, available, and viable. And kind of the bottleneck of what the big box store decides to purchase can be relaxed. And a much longer tail of products, this is why it's called the long tail, the tail of the distribution, may become viable now. But the key, and this is the reason that the recommender systems community latched onto this so much, is that the key to making that a reality is personalization. We can only connect these niche musicians, these niche artisans, with the audience that will buy their product and allow them to have a commercially successful small-scale business, or even just a revenue-positive hobby, depends on being able to figure out which users and customers will resonate with their music, with their products, and which won't. Because if we just randomly recommended people from here, we'd recommend them to people who just didn't get it, and it was kind of a wasted slot, but there's something else they would get. And so if we want to unlock this segment of the economy, personalized information access is the key to doing so. And so personalization on its own, if it is done well and effectively, can be an engine of economic opportunity by allowing larger sets and a more diverse set of people to find their audience and their customer base. And if we adopt this view, then we start to look at questions like, how is that opportunity distributed? Are we giving the same all the recommendation slots to the same 10 musicians, or are we getting a lot of providing opportunity to niche musicians? If a new author releases their first book, does it get recommended on Goodreads? Or are the recommendations just full of the third, fourth, and fifth books by established authors? A lot of questions flow downstream from saying, this is the reason we're trying to build the platform. We may be thinking about information access in educational settings, either formal educational settings or informal ones, where our goal is to help people learn things, to facilitate learning and knowledge acquisition. We may be building a system that is intended to help users explore an information space or a product space and understand what different information is available and what information maybe they're missing, or find and explore new musical genres or something. And if the goal is to facilitate this exploration and to facilitate this development of kind of meta information and knowledge about the space of information, we might evaluate the system differently than if we're only thinking about the system in terms of responding to individual fixed information needs. We might be trying to facilitate cultural discovery and cultural connection because the items, the products, the songs, the films that we're recommending don't just exist in a vacuum disconnected from humanity, but they're created by people in particular cultures with particular goals and cultural backgrounds. So these are a couple of bands that I've discovered through recommendation in various ways. Both through YouTube's recommender, actually, because I like watching concert videos. And the first one is a power trio of sisters from Monterrey, Mexico, playing some of the freshest hard rock I've heard in a long time. And YouTube's like, hey, you want to watch this? I'm like, I've never heard this. Oh, sure, I'll give it a shot. Oh, wow, that's good. And they're now doing very well. They've had some stuff go viral, and they're touring internationally and things, representing the Mexican rock scene to the world. And that one, YouTube directly recommended their video. The second, Ginger, is a progressive metalcore band from Ukraine. This was an indirect recommendation. Okay, the microphone. Okay. YouTube had recommended to me, not them, but a reactor who does song reactions. And she did a reaction to a Ginger video, and that's how, so it's like, YouTube didn't recommend Ginger, but it recommended the person who recommended Ginger. And so now I listen to a fair amount of their music, and they're also touring internationally and talking about the war against their country and representing Ukraine culturally on the international metal stage. But there's this human, like it's connecting us to people and connecting us to cultures either directly or indirectly by making these kinds of connections. In general, we might be thinking about information access for connection. So I just talked about artistic connection, but there's other forms of connection too. There's direct connection. Who to follow recommenders on social networks. They're trying to make direct person-to-person connections. Dating recommenders are another example of this. And they're trying to very literally promote human connections. Knowledge connection, where we're connecting to other people through the recommendation of the material that's describing their experiences. They're writing blog posts, they're writing LinkedIn posts, they're sharing their knowledge, they're sharing their experience. That's being recommended, but through that recommendation, we're also being connected to the person who produced it, to the person who is sharing this experience with us. So human connection can be a goal of an information access system. And if this is your goal, then you might measure things related to human connection. So for one example, when Instagram rolled out their algorithmic feed ranker, they, in one of the blog posts their research team or engineering team put out about it, they talked about how they measured, or they talked about measuring the probability that you're going to see one of your close connections posts. Because if it's just chronological, and your best friend posts a picture of their birthday cake, and you don't log into Instagram for 6 hours later, and you don't see it because it's overwhelmed by everything else that's been posted in the last 6 months. And so with a goal of human connection, you can say, no, we want to promote that connection, and we know either because you've said it's in the close friends list, or just through looking at interaction density, we figure out this is a person you care about interacting with a lot. When you sign in, we can say, oh, this close friend of yours posted their birthday cake 6 hours ago. We're going to put that in the top 2 or 3 things rather than making you scroll to find it because you know you want to see your friend's birthday cake. And then measure that. And they reported measurements of the algorithmic ranking really increasing the probability that if you posted something, your close friends would actually see it in the next hours or day or whatever. But if this is your goal, you go try to measure it, you go try to design for it. So we connect people to each other individually, culturally. We can think about connecting people to communities or connecting communities to each other, connecting people to communities of practice. We can think about recommendation and information access to promote social cohesion. The people who are working on bridging algorithms are thinking about this, of how do we recommend items that are going to cross divides and help people understand people who think very differently from them. But the core to all of these is the people, that information access is a fundamentally human endeavor. It's for people, but it is also of people. And thinking about these human goals provide guides for how we can design our systems, how we can design our valuations. They provide a framework for thinking about how do we do information access in a humanist kind of way, etc. And allow us then to think through, what is it that we're really trying to accomplish in the world? Is it some abstract notion of some property, engagement, perceived utility, fairness? Or what are we trying? Are we trying to produce a more just and equitable society? What's the difference we want our work to make in our communities, our societies, and the world at large? It also provides us a guide point to start to think about tricky situations. What if someone provides harmful information? Maybe it's hateful. Maybe it's misleading. What if somebody wants that information? How do we think through these kinds of questions and problems? It's not easy. So, kind of my starting point for trying to think about some of those problems, there's a lot of places we can start. I'm going to look at a few different lenses on it. We'll start by thinking about institutional ethics. And by institutional ethics, I mean codes of ethics that have been formalized and adopted by institutions, such as the Association for Computing Machinery, which sponsors the Recommender Systems Conference and many others. One of the earliest points in their code of ethics is that computing professionals should contribute to society and human well-being. This is actually the first specific ethical principle after the preface. Contribute to society and human well-being. Well, that's a goal that aligns with some of the goals that we've talked about. We can maybe think about how we can do this through information access. They also have one I skipped over, which is avoid harm. And this one, be fair and take action not to discriminate. One of the very interesting things about this one that struck me when I read it is its proactivity. It doesn't say just do your thing, and if you eventually learn that you're discriminating, maybe do something about it. It says to take action not to discriminate, to be proactive in anticipating how our own professional interactions and work may be discriminatory, or how our products and systems may be discriminatory, and to do something about it. This is baked into the ACM's Code of Ethics. We're thinking about information access. We might also go to libraries. The International Federation of Library Associations also has a code of ethics for librarians and information professionals. And they have a bunch of things in there. A couple I'll call out first is access to information. And that's kind of the bedrock. The first ethical principle for librarians and information professionals is to facilitate people's access to information without restriction, without censorship, and without discrimination. Also, that we have responsibilities towards both individuals and to society at large. And here it talks about to promote inclusion and eradicate discrimination, and to do that, making sure that everybody has access to information, and that's not being denied based on any personal factors. And also to respect, it also specifically calls out in there respecting language minorities, not contributing to trying to erase languages, but working as we can, provide people with information in their language to sustain language communities as well. But we can also see very quickly in this code of ethics some political commitments. This is not a neutral, apolitical document. They say that this first point, personal development, education, cultural enrichment, leisure, economic delivery, activity, and informed participation in an enhancement of democracy. And it actually gives those as the reasons for facilitating access to information. So if we adopt this code, if we want to live by this code, it calls specifically to the promotion of information access and facilitation of information access to support informed participation in democracy. The preface specifically says that librarianship is, in its very essence, an ethical activity embodying a value-rich approach to professional work. This also applies to computing. Because I sometimes hear in various contexts about well, I'm just building a system, or it's not my job, or I'm not an ethicist or whatever. But these codes of ethics and professional conduct for us as professionals, or as professionals in training, don't say, oh yeah, you can just ignore ethics if you're not trained in it. Doesn't mean all of us have to become professional ethicists, but we should take seriously the ethical responsibilities of our profession. And choosing to go along with whatever is also a value judgment and a value decision. It's not that, oh, we're choosing to embrace values versus being value neutral. It's just it's what set of values are we embracing and are we living out and are we working out of? As I noted, they're specifically calling out promoting inclusion, eradicating discrimination. They're specifically calling out informed participation in democracy. There's a lot going on here in these codes of ethics. There's also some complexity, and this slide broke. Because it talks about access to information regardless of political belief. But there's a lot of political beliefs out there, some of which are very harmful to some groups of our society. How should we engage with that? I will say the answer is not easy. A lot of these things bring a lot more questions than answers. Now it's somewhat fixed. Does providing information access require us to facilitate information access to this kind of information? That's a question. And it's a question that, regardless of how we decide on it, we shouldn't just trivially dismiss. You can make a principled argument for yes or no, but make the argument and read the arguments. Because if we engage with some of the reasons that are given, such as promoting inclusion and eradicating discrimination, that might lead us to, does providing access, or does knowingly or unnecessarily facilitate, showing people racist screeds about communities in their city, promote inclusion or eradicate discrimination? It's a question we should think about. This paper engages directly with that question, considering the context of readers' advisory librarians, where people come and get suggestions for books to read, and what happens with what the author calls oppressive tastes, where someone is specifically interested in, for example, violently misogynist literature, is thinking primarily in the fiction context. What are the ethical obligations of the reader's advisory librarian in that context? And he grounds his response to that in this commitment to inclusion and this commitment to democracy in the Library Code of Ethics. That material and unnecessarily providing that material, facilitating access to that material can create problems for democratic self-governance. And specifically, it can distort our judgments of the credibility, empathic accessibility, and fundamental worth of our fellow democratic citizens. You also have questions of like, well, is it the librarian's job to say, no, you can't? But there's also the question of saying, no, you can't have this. They probably won't say that. But like, no, I'm not going to help you find it is another thing. Like, what is the balance? I'm not going to say it's easy, and I'm not going to say we're all going to land at the same place. But I am going to say to think seriously about it. So, that gets us to questions like if we're thinking on, I raised earlier the question of, okay, is everybody in our user group, or are all the different groups of users of our system getting comparable access to information? Well, is our goal to give everyone information that they perceive as satisfying their information need? Or is our goal to give them accurate information to the extent that we can assess that aligns with their information need? Again, not easy, but a question that we should take seriously, and we should be clear with ourselves, with our colleagues, what it is that we're trying to achieve with the system. And then think about whether our evaluations are aligned with that, whether our designs are aligned with that, etc. So, I'm going to go quickly over this bit. I have a lot of things that I can share with you, but I don't want to keep you here all night and keep you from the beer. So, politics and even just democracy is not just one concept. The political science literature recognizes multiple different types of democracy. And we can actually see in the specific things that are called out in the Library Code of Ethics and the ACN Code of Ethics actually different emphases. The Library Code of Ethics reads to me as more aligned with participatory democracy or deliberative democracy, as opposed to more of a classically liberal democracy that the ACM Code more emphasizes in terms of economic opportunity and individual autonomy and things. I'm not here to debate the relative merits of those two forms of democracy. I think they both have a lot of merit, but even within, we want to pursue democracy, we can be more specific. For one example of this, there's this paper that I really like by Sanne Vranhoek and collaborators on looking at a bunch of different diversity metrics for news recommendation and thinking about which specific types of democracy do the different metrics align with. Say, if you want to support deliberative democracy, you might try to diversify your news in this way. And that kind of very specific thinking about, because it doesn't just have to stay at the abstract. We can connect our specific goals to specific evaluation metrics, specific optimization objectives, specific design decisions in building an information access system. And we should think about how to go about doing that. If we're going to build systems that affect the kind of change that we want to see in the world and that support the kind of society that we want to live in and that we want to contribute to. So, I'll talk next a little bit about social connections. So, as I mentioned earlier, if you set social connection as your goal, you can think about things like what kinds of things you optimize. Are you just optimizing time on site, total minutes of video watched, total likes, or some other kind of direct engagement metric? Or are you looking at other things, possibly not totally replacing those, but at least in addition to them? Are you looking at the probability of a user seeing their close friend's post within X hours of it coming out? If you do, you can put that at least in your evaluation. You might be able to find a clever way to put it into your system design. Maybe you're building a bandit algorithm and you give a higher weight to the reward signal for something that comes from someone's close friend, so it learns to uprank things from close friends. But so thinking about these goals, I think like we can sometimes think of ethics as maybe limiting, or like, oh, what we shouldn't do. But for me, thinking about ethical principles, thinking about social goals like non-discrimination and debiasing, thinking about human goals for recommendation and information access, expand my vision of what it is that we can try to achieve through technology. We can also think about recommendation itself as a community. It's maybe a little weird, but there's this paper that I absolutely love from 1995, part of like the very earliest cohort of modern recommender systems papers, that was specifically looking at like using recommenders to kind of simulate community connection for information discovery. And they had a few different design principles for a recommender system in there. One was that it should ease and encourage rather than replace social processes. They didn't want the recommender system to replace talking with your friends or replace being a part of a community that likes some things. They wanted to enhance that and maybe allow you to find community that you can't find locally by connecting you to a broader national or global community. They also argued that recommendations should be from people and not in the personal, like, oh, I recommend this to you, although Goodreads has implemented that and people use it, but that it's transparent, the system operating, like these recommendations you are getting are based on consensus or behavior of this community or of other people in this community who are similar to you. We can also think in terms of social connection, of supporting expertise in the relationship of people and experts like teachers or librarians. We have a paper in ACM Interactions a couple of years ago looking at actually four different models for how an expert like a teacher and a student can be involved together in an information access scenario. Thinking about the specific scenario and designing to support that creates opportunity to think about how do we build systems that support experts rather than trying to replace them. Because a lot of things are like, oh, we're going to make this new AI thing and it's going to replace your librarian or it's going to replace this or that expert in your life. But if we instead, there's a broad design space to think about how do we make those systems to help the expert more effectively help you, not take them out of your life. And this is where I want to talk about generative AI for a little bit. Because generative AI came on the scene. It either changed everything or changed nothing, depending on your perspective. But I want to talk about a few specific things it does change. So I talked about a few different ways that recommender systems connect people to people. And either directly or indirectly through, like, oh, I've got some programming problem, and it's recommending me a Stack Overflow answer, or a blog post, or I'll show my age, a Usenet article that was written by somebody who had that problem and figured out the solution, and I'm like, okay, a fellow traveler dealing with this weird arcane thing of Python. Also, that person-to-person connection brings opportunity. Economic opportunity, whether it's ad clicks or whether it's subscription services, or even just reputational opportunity. The material is all free, but a bunch of things, I keep finding this person's artwork, and I need to commission an artist for illustrating this thing. Maybe I'll use them. That kind of indirect effect. When we just replace the recommendation of things created by people with generative responses, we are no longer connecting people to people. We are connecting people to the system. We're no longer the middle connecting link. We're connecting it to the system. And this is connected to what Cory Doctorow termed enshittification, which is sometimes simplified to like things get worse, but the actual theory of agentification is much more subtle. And his argument is that you build a platform built on connecting people to people, or people to vendors, or whatever. And then, in the interest of profits and stock returns and those kinds of things, you look for where you can get more and more profit. And you start to put on the squeeze. Typically, you first start squeezing your vendors or suppliers and just making life progressively more difficult for them, to taking a progressively larger share of their profits. But they're stuck because you're their pipeline to their audience. And then once they can't squeeze them anymore, they start to directly squeeze the users, increasing subscription fees, more annoying ads, all kinds of things, to finally like just be capturing as much value to themselves as they can, rather than facilitating transaction and commerce between people and taking a modest cut to maintain operation and profitability. That's the theory of agentification. And saying, I'm not going to give attention to the bloggers, the news art, the journalists, the authors, etc. I'm going to take all of the attention and opportunity to sell ads and all of those things to myself as the platform. That fundamentally alters the economics of information access and information production, and it fundamentally alters the social contract around information and information access. Because we kind of have this long-standing social contract of like, we're going to let search engines index, and they're going to send us links, and we're not going to worry too much about like the finer points of the copyright. And there were some lawsuits and things, but kind of like there was this kind of status quo social contract that kind of emerged. It breaks it. That has consequences. We're no longer supporting connection and relationship if we're just going to give the generative response. We're no longer, the economic opportunity is fair because nobody's getting any of it. So they're all getting the same if the system is just connecting the users to itself. So, and then like this is also, it's connected to the information retrieval folks have been talking for a while about like, people aren't looking for documents, they're looking for information. Recommending that retrieving the document is just how we answer the question for information. And now, okay, ChatGPT and other Gemini and other LLM-powered chatbots, they're actually delivering on that kind of a promise in a really big way. Are we really prepared for the consequences of success in terms of its impact on communities, on human relationship, on the economics of information production? Why are what's the incentive for people to produce the information that GPT-6 or whatever is going to need to train? If there's no opportunity to get compensated for work producing information? Crucially, so there's a number of critiques of generative information access, LLMs, etc., that are around the various aspects that they don't work. Hallucinations, those kinds of things. Crucially, these critiques don't depend on them not working. In many ways, they're critiques about what does the world look like when they do work. And it doesn't mean we shouldn't ever deploy an LLM anywhere. But what we should do is think very clearly about what are our system goals? What are our platform goals? Does changing the modality in this way or introducing that technology advance those goals or hinder those goals? If we're not in the business of connecting to people, we might not care, although not caring might have consequences down the road for us, for our users, etc. But if we do uphold that value of connecting people to people, that has consequences for how we think about the design of the system. So I'm not saying don't. I mean, I have a lot of skepticism, but I'm not saying, just they're the devil, we need to throw them all away in every case. I'm saying we need to think about our goal. What are we trying to facilitate when we facilitate access to information? And what designs are going to advance that goal? That's the key point I want you to take from this. There's also a lot of problems with them not working. and promoting a lot of misinformation and things. But what concerns me a lot is that our information ecosystem and our societies in many ways feel to me like they're kind of hanging on by a very fragile thread. What are we doing as information professionals, as computing professionals, as professionals in training, to strengthen those things? To build systems that promote healthy societies, to build systems that promote robust and equitable marketplaces of information, of products, of art and culture, etc. I would like to say a lot of things about power and control and the Pope, but I don't have a lot of time left. I will note, though, that there has been concern for a while among many, or among some at least, about the ability of systems to manipulate our individual and our communal perception of information, of the world, of each other. Belkin and Robertson talked about this back in 1976 in a paper that is criminally undercited and underread. The Pope also expressed concern about this in his message for the World Day of Peace in 2024 about the risk of AI systems manipulating people's opinions and impressions and understandings. We can design for more positive social spread things. The notes and the slides, the bibliography will all be there for you to read at the end. And so, to wrap up, where do we go? I don't want to just be talking about so the purpose. Thinking about what the purpose is the big thing I want you to take away. We all, as individuals, as a community of practice on information access, recommender systems, etc., as members of our companies, of our other communities, have choices. What we build, what we're going to contribute to, what we're going to use. And so as we navigate those choices, we need to think about the purpose of the system, the purpose of our lives. We need to think about power and how it's distributed and who has the power to make the system do this or that. Thinking about how we structure meaningful democratic accountability structures around technology so that power is not just held in the hands of platform owners and platform developers. We need to think about the people who use the system, who produce the information in the system, who experience it and are impacted by it. So with that, thank you. And I'm happy to take questions.